I'd go sit here and wait for the others. You want to do it for me? No.
So you thought Texas weather in October, it was New York weather.
So 90 degrees in October.
Correct.
That's months. Yeah, it's good.
You got it, Frank? All right. I'm the elected district attorney in Washington and Burleson counties. Joining me as soon as they get their chairs adjusted, I'll start with the lady on my left. It's Kelly Siegler. Kelly was hired by me as a special prosecutor on this case, and I think her reputation speaks loudly for itself. I probably have one of the best prosecutors in the state of Texas that was at my service for this case. Also assisting on the far right is Otto Honig. Otto is a retired Texas Ranger. I was able to talk him out of retirement last October 5th, and he's employed as my investigator. Between us is Texas Ranger Sergeant Andres de la Garza. The investigation of this case was conducted exclusively by these two gentlemen, primarily by my investigator, Mr. Honig. I want to start by saying simply this. October 16th of 2009, this case came into my office, and it was brought in to me, and I treated it, made a statement back then, that it would be handled as a brand new case walking in the door. That we would look at it with fresh eyes, we would investigate this case as if nothing had ever been done. And that is one of the reasons why I acquired the services of Ms. Siegler and exclusively used my investigator to, again, reinvestigate every nook, cranny, or as I said yesterday, turn over every pebble that was possible, leading to any evidence whatsoever in this case, dealing with the possibility, probability of Anthony Graves being involved in this capital murder. I think as you all are well aware, Mr. Graves' case was returned to this county, I think it was March the 3rd of 2006, and sat kind of not so much in idle, but was handled by numerous other people. When I say numerous, there was at least 2 other special prosecutors on this case. And when it came back to me exclusively in October of last year, thus we took and went forward. Everything we did on this case, every ounce of our energy was put towards trying to determine and prove whether or not Anthony Graves, number one, we had sufficient evidence to go forward to retry him. Our primary emphasis was on determining his guilt or not guilty. Could we go forward? Do we have sufficient evidence to retry the case? As time went on, we almost shifted from, actually we did shift from the possibility of, gee, maybe we don't have sufficient evidence, till we have no evidence, to the fact that we may have an innocent man. It's kind of a rare situation where a prosecutor, without the use of DNA or any other type of evidence that dispels guilt, looks at a case and says, there's no evidence. This man is not guilty. But that was the decision I was faced with. Up to about last week, I was the last holdout, if you will, on being able to say, this man is innocent. But we reassessed again and again and again by going through every ounce, every single piece of paper. And if you want to, we have 25 banker's boxes full of evidence across the street, evidence being prior transcripts, prior hearings, interviews, everything that was possible to be determined to be utilized in this case from the prior trials, we reviewed and reviewed and reviewed. And it came down to, there's not a single thing that says Anthony Graves is involved in this case. Now, a lot has been said that Robert Carter, who has been executed, and in my opinion, rightfully so, for his commission of the offense of capital murder, taking the lives of 6 people, 4 of whom were children, probably one of the most heinous crimes that, well, I'm aware of. But when it came to Anthony Graves' involvement, There is none. Nothing that I could find to say this, to absolutely say, even by, which is not the standard review, preponderance of the evidence. There is nothing. So yesterday, decision was made that there's no need any longer for me to hold an innocent man in jail, because I cannot say beyond any doubt in my mind that this man is guilty, remotely guilty. In fact, my conclusion was, is, and will be, he's an innocent man. And I don't have any reluctance in saying that. I know I may have critics out here that will say, well, he was convicted previously. Well, that's fine. But we are the ones, I am the one responsible for making that determination based on everything that we have been able to determine led to, one, his prior conviction, and I believe wrongfully so, but to now the fact that he is a free man, and from that standpoint, that is basically all I have to say. If you have any questions, I'm going to tell you right now, we'll not go into too much detail, but please, if you have any questions, ask them.
He spent 16 years of his life, 12 of them on death row. Are you going to be in any kind of talks with Mr. Graves about some kind of reparation or repayment? Did they ever do anything like that?
Frank, I will not be in the talks. It's not my position, but I know that he has well-qualified attorneys, and I'm sure there are individuals out there that the determination made that Mr. Graves receives whatever reparations he is entitled to as a result of his incarceration, he will so receive.
Would you like him to see anything, sir?
Sir?
Would you like him to get anything?
I don't think it's proper for me to say he gets anything or not, or would like to or would not. I think the state of the law is that he will, and that's the most important thing, is that he will. My decision on what I did and how I did it and why I did it has nothing to do with the state of Texas may owe this man some money. My decision and the obligation I took when I took the oath of this office was to see that justice is done, and if that includes someone maybe on death row that is innocent, or someone on death row that maybe even not guilty, and I have to seek a reversal of that case, or I agree to that, that's my duty. And I don't have the first qualm in performing that duty. I believe prosecutors across the nation feel the same way. But that is what I did, and as far as whether I would like him to or not, I don't think that's a good question. I don't think it's a proper question, and that's the only answer I can give you to that.
You talked to friends and loved ones of victims. What was that conversation like?
We discussed Tuesday night to the extent of about 3.5 hours.
Before then.
Well, that was the last discussion. Before then, Ms. Ziegler met with the family about 2 weeks before that. But specifically on Tuesday night, we were all present and we met. We went through in detail why this case was being dismissed, and there was a great deal of emotion, and I think in my heart of hearts that they share the decision I made, and so to answer your question, yes, I did.
And what did they say?
Perhaps in looking at that, it would be the same thing anybody would say, I lost 6 family members, are you sure? And then I'll leave that at that. As far as any other discussion, I don't think I really want to get into detail with what was said and what was not said with the family. I think that's their privacy, and I will honor their privacy. If you want to ask them directly, that's up to you.
Weren't there witnesses who testified that the North County Jail, that they've heard conversations between Mr. Carter and Mr. Gray?
I'll tell you what I'm going to do. Some of what you hear her, but I will let her answer that question.
Can you hear me?
No, we're going to have to move on.
That's fine. I'll shift over. I don't mind getting up.
Also, 2009, they were tested Mr. Gray. Was that also?
I think ultimately it's the prosecutor's responsibility to make sure when they handle a case that no one is ever indicted who's not guilty, that a witness is never put on a witness stand and asked a question that they cannot answer, that a witness is never asked to testify as an expert in an area where they're not. It's a prosecutor's responsibility to make sure that they never fabricate evidence or manipulate witnesses or take advantage of victims. And unfortunately, what happened in this case is all of those things. Charles Sebesta handled this case in a way that would be best described as a criminal justice system's nightmare. And I would think y'all's first question would be, okay, well, why now? What's changed? What happened? And I think you have to understand it's because of Otto Hannick, who investigated this case as an ex-Texas Ranger and as a local Brenham boy, who went and found all these witnesses and got them to agree to talk to him and to talk to me in response to questions that had never been asked before. Because we went at this in the last month with the idea that, oh my God, what happened in Anthony Graves' trial? And when we asked those witnesses about what happened with them in that respect, all of a sudden we got all kinds of new information. And it's because of him. They trusted him and they talked to him, and they never talked to anybody and told them all the things that they told us. And it's a travesty what happened in Anthony Graves' trial. To answer your question about the corroborating witnesses in the trial that were from the jail, back in 1992, there was a bond hearing where Dick DeGuerin represented Anthony Graves. And in that bond hearing, witnesses were called and testified about things they overheard in the jail. And it became clear in that bond hearing that the intercom system didn't quite work the way it was laid out in trial by Sebesta. And in that bond hearing, it became quite clear that those witnesses couldn't really say who Carter was and who Graves was, which voices were whose, because they didn't even know the men. At the trial, though, those witnesses were put on the stand by Charles Sebesta, and the defense lawyers never seemed to be aware of what happened at that 92 bond hearing. It's a prosecutor's job to tell about inconsistent statements, and that also was never done in this case.
Kelly, you're saying the prosecution in this case engaged in misconduct?
Say that again?
Are you saying the prosecution in this case engaged in misconduct?
Absolutely. The worst I've ever seen. I'm sorry?
Potentially criminal misconduct?
Well, the statute of limitations has run on all that. Mr. Sebesta in Anthony Graves' trial, when it came time for the defense to put on the woman who lay in bed beside the man when the capital murder was happening, Charles Sebesta stood up in court and told the judge to give the woman her Fifth Amendment rights because she was a suspect in this case and possibly going to be indicted one day. The woman is as innocent as everybody in this room, and he asked the judge in Graves' trial to give her Fifth Amendment rights, to scare her away. And it worked, and it scared her away. And I have never heard of a prosecutor doing something like that. It's horrible. He indicted a woman named Teresa Carter with no evidence. Otto and I asked Mr. Sebesta, what evidence did you have against Teresa Carter? And he had no answer. That's an unimaginable thing that can happen, and that's what happened in this case.
You said that, Ms. Park, you said you're convinced a second person was at the scene. Is it their investigation to try to start that again, or is it too call at this point?
As we stated a few minutes ago, this case, I understand there is no statute of limitations for the crime of murder. When this case originally came through, there were 3 weapons used, so therefore, the theory of the case, there must be 3 defendants. That in itself, was a bothersome fact for me that was how it was initially handled. And because of 3 weapons, therefore the case says there must be 3 people. That's how it was treated. That's how it was handled. I don't believe that's the case. I do believe, and I will not ever be convinced, the case will never be closed totally. Because I think in my heart that Carter could not have done, he could have done it all by himself, but do I believe there was a second person involved? Yes, I do. But I can unequivocally state Anthony Graves was not that second person. And that's all I'll address on that issue. But do I believe there's a second person? Yes, I do. And will that case be closed? No, it will not.
One other point that needs to be made is that in Robert Carter's trial, the testimony to his jury was that there were 2 knives involved. 2 witnesses testified in Robert Carter's trial that there were 2 knives involved. And then,
Got it?
in Anthony Gray's trial, this weapon became involved, and the presentation of evidence to Anthony Graves' jury was that a sister knife, just like this one, only it was white, not blue, was the murder weapon. And if you talk to the man named Roy Reuter about how this knife came to be, the explanation he gave was completely different than the way it came out in trial. And so you take this knife, look at it. We're talking about a case where baby skulls were stabbed and penetrated. 66 stab wounds through 5 people, through skulls and through bones. How could this kind of knife have been used without cuts being all over the hand of the person who used the knife? But Sebesta put this knife in as being just like the murder weapon, had a witness testify that it fit like a glove into the skull of one of the babies, and in the first trial, there were 2 knives. So how can a prosecutor do that? How can you manipulate evidence and manufacture it into being a murder weapon?
Any other questions?
Did Charles Sebesta cooperate with your investigation, and were you able to convince him of your conclusions?
We will never convince him of our feelings. Otto and I spoke with him in person. We asked him the questions, how did you indict Teresa Carter? How could you ask a judge to give a woman her Fifth Amendment rights when you knew she was not involved? How could you change your theory of a case so drastically? And he couldn't really answer our questions.
Anything else from anybody?
Y'all don't want to ask Otto anything?
So that knife wasn't involved at all, or?
Otto, what do you think?
Was
Loud, you gotta speak loud.
identical to this knife involved? In my opinion, no. We've
Otto,
got,
come over here.
I'll tell you this, he was not going to speak and then threatened me that I am not talking, but obviously, he will.
You say and spell your name for us first?
H-A-N-A-K. H-A-M-A-K?
H-A-N is in November.
And you're talking?
Investigator. I'll briefly go over this knife issue. If we're talking about a knife that is a twin to this one being used in these murders, my opinion is it never could have happened. It never could have happened without serious injuries to the person that was using this knife, and it never would have been able to go through human beings to the tune of 60 plus stab wounds and survive. Couldn't have done it. So for this knife, or a replica of this knife, to have been used in court to convince a jury that this is identical to the murder weapon could not have happened.
Anybody else, any questions?
Just make sure I'm sure about now, there were 2 knives involved. Either one of those knives ever recovered?
No weapon was ever
No
recovered.
weapon ever recovered.
There's been absolutely no physical evidence recovered in this case, period.
And how is it Mr. Graves became involved in this case? Who fingered it? Who blamed it?
That's an easy answer to a question. And back when Robert Carter appeared at the funeral of the people in Somerville, he had substantial burn bandages, and he became a very much target real quick because there was also arson involved in the house. The result of a custodial interrogation of Robert Carter, he gave up a name and he said Anthony Graves. Thus, Anthony Graves became involved. That's as simple terms as it gets.
You know why? Why would
I don't know why.
Anthony Graves and Graves?
Unfortunately, I can't ask him. And that's the only way I would have an answer to that question. Hang on a second, let Kelly address that.
His explanation
Yeah.
to Cookie was that he gave the name Anthony Graves because the Rangers wouldn't let it be that only one person was the killer. And he thought of Anthony Graves' name because he knew of him, and he figured he could alibi himself and prove where he was at the time. So he threw out a name that he thought could clear himself right away. And only 2 days later, Robert Carter recanted what he said. He told his first lawyer, look, I said Anthony Graves, I shouldn't have. He has nothing to do with this. It was wrong of me. The very next day, 3 days after he first threw Anthony Graves in the middle of all this, it was time for grand jury, and Robert Carter insisted on testifying to grand jury, even though his lawyer told him not to, so he could go in there and say Anthony Graves had nothing to do with this. So it wasn't that, as the jury was told in Anthony Graves' trial, that it rocked on for months or years and Robert Carter never said anything. Robert Carter started trying to clear Anthony Graves' name 2 days later. And he tried, and he tried, and he tried. Now, at Anthony Graves' trial, Robert Carter got on the stand and said he did it with Anthony Graves. But what y'all have to remember is this. That trial happened in Angleton, Texas, on a change of venue from Caldwell. It's a change of venue. It's a big deal case. The jury had been picked. At that point, jeopardy had attached, which meant we're in this for good. There's no backing out. There's no reset. There's no continuance. The morning that Robert Carter was to testify, he told Charles Sebesta, Anthony had nothing to do with this, I'm not going to testify. Well, at that point, had that happened, Charles Sebesta was screwed. There was nothing he could do. That was his main evidence. We asked Charles Sebesta that. Were you kind of in a bind when that happened? Yes, I was.
Where is this prosecutor now?
Where is what prosecutor?
Charles said.
Charles Sebesta retired 12 years ago. And
What
he's,
about now some of the cases that he's handled, revisiting those? You all have to do any of that?
I am not at this point anticipating having to revisit any cases. You know, unless I have something more than that. The fact that Anthony Graves' case is, as far as I'm concerned, the only case at this time to sit and try to go through every single solitary case has been handled since 1994. One, I don't have the people. I know my county judge is in here, and perhaps maybe she'll hire me somebody else, but the best thing I can say for you is this. I don't anticipate revisiting any other cases.
But I think if anything came forward where there was such a situation as this, Bill wouldn't hesitate to look into it.
Absolutely.
Kelly, you said Charles Sebesta said he was in a bind. Then what? Why did Robert Carter testify?
Well, because when you're a prosecutor and you put a co-defendant on the stand, the rule is to the co-defendant, look, you're going to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. That's the oath everybody takes, even a co-defendant. You tell the whole truth or your deal is off. What happened in Anthony Graves' trial was Robert Carter's deal with Charles Sebesta was, get up there and tell what you did and what Graves did, and I'm not going to ask you anything about what Cookie did, about what Teresa Carter did. Well, how can a prosecutor put a witness on the stand with this wink-wink deal, I'm not going to ask you about Cookie? Because if the defense were to ask about Cookie and he lied about it, then where are you? You can't make a deal with the co-defendant where you're not going to ask about the whole truth. And that's what happened in Anthony Graves' trial, and it should have never happened.
Well, maybe, I think I'm a little confused now.
Okay.
Carter told the prosecutor that morning he was not going to implicate him.
He had said it the night before, and they had a long night going back and forth on that.
So then he put him on the stand and he did implicate.
He did.
Okay, was there a
Before he put him up-
between the two where, I mean,
Before he was put on the stand, that is the deal that was made. For you to testify, will not ask you any questions about your wife, who was at that time indicted as the third suspect.
if you perjure yourself?
No,
I mean, was
we're
that-
just not going to ask you any questions. You're not going to perjure yourself if I don't ask you any questions. If I go, well, wasn't she there with you, and who was there, or anything of the sort? She was a non-topic, a non-existent entity at that time. That was the deal that was made for him, Carter, to testify.
Okay, well, I guess I'm still running a little behind. If Carter got on the stand and then said he was there with me,
He did.
He did say that.
and And but that was not part of his understanding with the prosecutor?
No, that was the deal. The deal was between Charles Sebesta and Robert Carter. You talk about what you did, Robert Carter, and what Anthony Graves did, but I won't ask you as a prosecutor about anything your wife did.
Right, but this is after he's already said, I'm not going to implicate Graves.
Correct.
So he lied on the stand to protect his wife.
That's what he said till the day he was executed.
With the knowledge of the prosecutor.
He said before he was executed in a deposition that was videotaped, look, I already knew you were trying an innocent man because I knew Anthony Graves had nothing to do with this. What was to stop you from going after my wife? I knew you were doing it right then. How was I not to know you would go after my wife? So yeah, I threw Anthony Graves under the bus to protect my wife. Robert Carter said that to the day he was executed.
Any questions? We thank you all for being here.
And
Yes, no, I'm sorry. Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, this is not a question. I just want to ask, before you all leave, can we get business cards from you so we make sure we have
Sure.
spelling and titles?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. But yeah, it's
What about victims now? Are they?
How you doing?